"We're restructuring the development team, James. Today will be your last day." Melissa Grant delivered the news without making eye contact, her attention focused on rearranging items on her pristine desk. I sat across from her in the glass-walled conference room, the Seattle skyline stretching behind her in a panorama that had once inspired me. Now it just framed the end of my 4-year career at Pinnacle Software. "Your severance package includes 8 weeks of pay and benefits continuation through the end of the month," she continued, sliding a folder toward me with manicured fingers. "HR has prepared the necessary paperwork." I nodded calmly, my expression betraying none of the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. Not anger, though that would have been justified after watching Melissa claim credit for my work for 3 consecutive years. Not shock, as I'd seen the warning signs for weeks. What I felt was something closer to anticipation, a steady, quiet certainty. Because while Melissa was firing me on Friday afternoon, thinking she'd neatly removed the last person who understood what she'd been doing, she had no idea what awaited her on Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m., when the board of directors would receive a meticulously documented dossier that had taken me months to compile. As she slid the termination paperwork across the table, I met her eyes and smiled slightly. "I understand completely," I said, signing where indicated. Her brow furrowed momentarily at my composure, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, before she regained her practiced executive demeanor. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items," she added, already reaching for her phone to signal the end of our meeting. As the security guard waited by the door, I took one last look at the office where I'd poured my creativity and expertise into projects that had advanced Melissa's career while stalling my own. "Have a good weekend, Melissa," I said as I left. "Monday's going to be quite interesting." She glanced up sharply, but I was already walking away, the weight of 3 years of stolen recognition lifting with each step. My name is James Wilson, 36 years old, senior software architect at Pinnacle Software, or at least I was until that Friday afternoon. I built my career through a combination of technical expertise and creative problem-solving, earning recognition at 2 previous companies before joining Pinnacle to lead development on their flagship product, Navigate AI. My professional reputation had always been built on both innovation and integrity, delivering cutting-edge solutions while maintaining honest, transparent relationships with colleagues and clients. I joined Pinnacle 4 years ago, drawn by the opportunity to work on artificial intelligence applications for the healthcare sector, technology with the potential to genuinely improve patient outcomes and medical efficiencies. For the first year, under the leadership of the previous department head, my contributions were appropriately recognized. My algorithms for predictive diagnosis support became a central selling point for Navigate AI, and my name appeared prominently in both internal documentation and external presentations. Everything changed when Melissa Grant was hired as VP of Product Development 3 years ago. With an MBA from a prestigious university and experience at a well-known tech giant, she arrived with ambitious plans to accelerate product development and raise Pinnacle's market profile. Initially, I was excited to work with someone who seemed to share my vision for healthcare AI innovation. The first incident was subtle enough that I questioned whether I was being oversensitive. During a quarterly review meeting with the executive team, Melissa presented my revised neural network architecture as a solution my team and I developed, with no specific mention of my central role. When I raised this with her privately afterward, she seemed genuinely apologetic. "It was just shorthand for the presentation," she explained. "Everyone knows you're leading that initiative." I accepted her explanation, chalking it up to the simplified communication often necessary in executive contexts. But a pattern soon emerged. In subsequent meetings, emails, and company announcements, My contributions were increasingly attributed to Melissa's team, then to our executive approach, and eventually presented as her direct innovations. The most egregious example came during the launch of Navigate AI 4.0, which featured my breakthrough algorithm for medication interaction predictions, work I had developed largely on weekends and evenings, beyond my regular responsibilities. At the press conference, Melissa described how she had recognized the potential for applying quantum computing principles to medication interactions, a specific insight that had come to me during a conference I had attended independently. When industry publications ran profiles of Pinnacle's innovation, Melissa was consistently positioned as the visionary behind our advances. My name, if mentioned at all, appeared alongside other team members as supporting players. Meanwhile, internally, my role was gradually marginalized. Melissa began excluding me from strategic meetings where my expertise was relevant, redirected my reporting structure through intermediate managers, and repeatedly questioned design decisions that didn't align with her preferences, even when those preferences contradicted established best practices. The situation became more problematic when my annual reviews, previously outstanding, shifted to merely meeting expectations, despite delivering increasingly impressive technical achievements. Raises and promotions that colleagues had indicated were forthcoming never materialized, always with vague explanations about budget constraints or organizational priorities. I wasn't naive, I recognized the political dynamics at play. Melissa was positioning herself as an AI visionary to advance her career, and my role as the actual innovator behind our technological advances complicated her narrative. But I was more focused on the work itself than on corporate politics, believing that objective results would eventually speak for themselves. That changed approximately 8 months ago when Melissa made a critical, strategic error. During a client presentation with Northwell Health System, our largest potential contract to date, she confidently described technical capabilities for Navigate AI that didn't exist and couldn't exist with our current architecture. As the technical lead present at the meeting, I was put in an impossible position: contradict my boss publicly, potentially losing the contract, or tacitly support claims I knew to be false. I chose a middle path, carefully framing the capabilities as development goals rather than current features, then worked frantically with my team over the next 6 weeks to deliver functionality that approached what Melissa had promised. We succeeded barely through an innovative workaround I developed that became the foundation for a proprietary algorithm, one that Melissa later presented to the board as her breakthrough approach. This incident marked a turning point in how I approached my role at Pinnacle. I realized that Melissa's behavior wasn't just about credit, but was creating tangible business risks. She was making commitments based on technical capabilities she didn't understand, positioning herself as the innovation driver while lacking the expertise to deliver on her promises. Sooner or later, this approach would create a critical failure. I began documenting everything methodically: emails, meeting notes, original design documents, code commits, timestamps of when specific innovations were developed and by whom. I created a secure, time-stamped record of my contributions and Melissa's subsequent representations of them. This wasn't initially intended as ammunition against her. It was professional self-defense, ensuring I could demonstrate my actual contributions if and when it became necessary. 2 months ago, the situation escalated when Melissa announced a major strategic pivot for Navigate AI, promising investors a new capability in clinical trial matching that would revolutionize drug development timelines. The announcement came with aggressive deadlines and was made without any consultation with the technical team about feasibility. When I reviewed the specifications, I immediately identified critical problems. The approach she outlined would create serious privacy vulnerabilities in patient data handling, potentially violating HIPAA regulations, and exposing Pinnacle to significant liability. I prepared a detailed analysis and requested an urgent meeting with Melissa. "These are theoretical concerns," she dismissed after barely glancing at my report. "The technical details can be worked out during implementation." "These aren't theoretical," I insisted. "The architecture you've committed to can't protect patient identifiers during the matching process. It's a fundamental design flaw." "James," she said with thinly veiled irritation, "this is exactly why I'm concerned about your fit with our evolving vision. You're constantly seeing roadblocks instead of opportunities. We need forward-thinking leadership, not technical obstacles." That meeting concluded with Melissa assigning the project to a more junior team lead who lacked my experience in healthcare data security, but was known for agreeing with her directives without question. I was effectively sidelined from our core product development for the first time in 4 years. Over the following weeks, I observed as the new team struggled with the implementation, making exactly the mistakes I had predicted. I offered guidance where I could, but found my access to key meetings and documents increasingly restricted. Meanwhile, I continued my careful documentation, now recognizing that Melissa's approach wasn't just a career inconvenience for me, but a genuine threat to the company and potentially to patient privacy. 3 weeks before my termination, I discovered something alarming while reviewing code that had been committed to our central repository. The implementation team, under pressure to meet Melissa's impossible deadlines, had created a shortcut that effectively stored unencrypted patient identifiers in a temporary database during the matching process. This wasn't just a potential hyper violation, it was a guaranteed one, with penalties that could reach into the millions and possibly criminal liability. I immediately documented the issue and sent an encrypted email to Melissa, copying our Chief Information Security Officer, detailing the specific violation and the urgent need to address it before deployment. The CISO responded within hours, thanking me and initiating a review. Melissa's response was quite different, a terse email requesting an in-person meeting the following morning. "You've overstepped," she said, when I arrived at her office. "Involving the CISO before discussing this with me undermines the team's work and creates unnecessary panic." "The code as written violates federal law," I replied calmly. "That's not a matter of opinion or team dynamics. It's an objective fact, with serious consequences for Pinnacle." Her expression hardened. "Your negative attitude is becoming disruptive. Perhaps you should consider whether Pinnacle is still the right place for your career." The warning was unmistakable. By prioritizing regulatory compliance over Melissa's reputation, I had placed myself in her crosshairs. I nodded, thanked her for her feedback, and returned to my desk where I immediately began backing up my documentation to secure time-stamped locations outside the Pinnacle network. The following 2 weeks saw a flurry of activity. The CISO's review confirmed my assessment, forcing a significant redesign of the clinical trial matching feature. Melissa positioned this as a refinement of the original concept rather than the fundamental overhaul it actually was. Meanwhile, I noticed incursions into my project files, attempts to reassign my code repositories, and subtle indicators that my team was being realigned without my knowledge. I knew termination was coming. The only questions were when and under what pretext. I used this time to finalize my documentation and consider my ethical obligations, not just to myself, but to Pinnacle as a company, its customers, and the patients whose data security was at stake. After careful consideration, I prepared a comprehensive report detailing the pattern of appropriated credit with specific examples and documentation, the technical misrepresentations made to clients and investors, the HIPAA compliance issues in the clinical trial matching feature 4, the broader pattern of prioritizing appearance over substance in product development. I addressed this report to Pinnacle's board of directors, with copies designated for our chief legal officer and the head of the audit committee. Rather than sending it immediately, I arranged for secure delivery on Monday morning, giving myself time to process my expected termination and ensuring the report would be received during business hours when it could be promptly addressed. When Friday afternoon arrived and Melissa called me to the conference room with HR present, I was prepared. The termination itself was executed exactly as I expected, vague references to restructuring and changing needs rather than any specific performance issues that might be disputed. I maintained a professional demeanor throughout, signed the necessary paperwork, and allowed security to escort me to collect my personal items. As I packed my belongings, several team members approached to express confusion and support. I thanked them sincerely but didn't share what would unfold on Monday. This wasn't about creating drama or rallying allies. It was about ensuring that factual information reached those with the authority and responsibility to act on it. The weekend was surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the weight of navigating Melissa's misrepresentations or worrying about protecting my professional reputation within a toxic dynamic. I had done what I could to document the truth, and now the situation was out of my hands. I spent Saturday hiking in the mountains outside Seattle and Sunday preparing my resume and reaching out to industry contacts about new opportunities. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that follows decisive action. At precisely 9 a.m. my report was delivered to the board members, chief legal officer, and audit committee head. By 10:30 a.m. my phone was lighting up with messages, first from former colleagues sharing news of sudden closed-door meetings, then from Nancy Chen, our chief legal officer, requesting that I make myself available for a conversation. I spoke with Nancy at noon, answering her questions factually and directing her to specific supporting documentation. She was professionally circumspect, but clearly concerned by what she had reviewed so far. "The board is taking this very seriously," she assured me. "We'll need some time to verify all the information you've provided." By Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from Richard Blackwell, Pinnacle's CEO, requesting an in-person meeting the following day. When I arrived at the corporate headquarters I had left just 5 days earlier, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. I was escorted not to a subordinate conference room but to the executive boardroom, where Richard waited along with Nancy and Marcus Fitzgerald, the head of the audit committee. "We've spent the past 2 days reviewing your report and conducting preliminary verification," Richard began. "I want to thank you for bringing these issues to our attention, particularly the compliance concerns." What followed was a 3-hour discussion covering every aspect of my documentation. Their questions were thorough but fair, focused on establishing facts rather than assigning blame. I learned that Melissa had been placed on administrative leave, pending the investigation's completion, and that an external law firm had been engaged to conduct an independent review. "I want to be clear," Richard said toward the end of our meeting, "that we view your actions in documenting and reporting these issues as aligned with Pinnacle's values of integrity and regulatory compliance, even though the method was unorthodox." I nodded, acknowledging the implicit reference to my decision to wait until after my termination to send the report. I believed this approach would ensure the information received objective consideration without being complicated by personality conflicts. A week later, Richard called again. The external investigation had corroborated my key allegations. Melissa's employment had been terminated, and the clinical trial matching feature had been paused for a complete security review and redesign. "We'd like to discuss your return to Pinnacle," Richard said, "in an expanded role that would report directly to the executive team. The offer was compelling: higher compensation, direct executive visibility, and explicit recognition of my contributions. But during my week away from Pinnacle, I had already received interest from 2 competing firms who had heard about my availability and were familiar with my actual work, if not the circumstances of my departure. More importantly, the experience had clarified what I valued most in my professional environment: integrity, transparent recognition of contributions, and a genuine commitment to ethical product development. While Richard seemed sincere in wanting to address the cultural issues that had enabled Melissa's behavior, I wasn't convinced that returning to Pinnacle was the right path forward. "I appreciate the offer," I replied, "but I think it's best for both me and Pinnacle if we move forward separately. I'm glad the compliance issues are being addressed, and I'm confident the company will be stronger for it." Richard seemed disappointed, but understanding. We discussed transition of knowledge, and he assured me that my contributions would be properly attributed in future communications about Navigate AI. As a goodwill gesture, Pinnacle offered an additional severance payment and agreed to positive reference terms that accurately reflected my contributions. 3 weeks later, I accepted a position as Chief Technology Officer at Helix Medical Systems, a smaller but growing competitor in the healthcare AI space. During the interview process, I was transparent about the general circumstances of my departure from Pinnacle without violating any confidentiality obligations. The CEO at Helix, herself a former software engineer, expressed appreciation for both my technical expertise and my ethical stance. "We're building a culture where innovation is properly attributed and compliance is never compromised," she told me. "Your experience is exactly what we need as we scale." In my first 6 months, at Helix we developed 2 major features that significantly advanced the company's market position. My name appeared on the patents, my contributions were explicitly acknowledged in press releases, and most importantly, the culture encouraged open dialogue about technical limitations and compliance requirements. Meanwhile, industry news reported that Pinnacle had delayed their clinical trial matching feature indefinitely and was conducting a comprehensive review of their development practices. Melissa Grant's LinkedIn profile showed she had moved to a much smaller company in an ambiguous strategic advisor role, a common landing spot for executives who can't secure positions matching their previous level. Looking back on my experience, at Pinnacle I realized that the issue wasn't just about credit, though that was certainly part of it. It was about the integrity of the development process itself. When leaders misrepresent technical capabilities, whether from ignorance or ambition, they create environments where corners are cut, compliance is compromised, and ultimately, products fail to deliver their promised value. For 3 years, my boss claimed my work as her own, building her career on innovations she didn't understand while gradually sidelining me from the very projects I had created. When I finally raised legitimate compliance concerns that threatened her narrative, she fired me, believing she had neatly removed the problem. What she didn't anticipate was that I had methodically documented everything, not out of vengeance, but out of professional responsibility. When Monday morning came and the board received my comprehensive report, the carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of objective evidence. The most valuable lesson wasn't about vindication, satisfying though that was. It was about the importance of operating with integrity even when others don't, and recognizing that true innovation requires both technical expertise and ethical clarity. In my new role at Helix, I'm building processes that ensure innovations are properly attributed, limitations are honestly communicated, and compliance is never sacrificed for speed or convenience. Sometimes the most important professional skill isn't technical expertise or political savvy, but the patient documentation of truth maintained consistently until the moment when it matters most. In an industry driven by the next breakthrough, there's enduring power in the methodical accumulation of facts, a quiet form of integrity that eventually speaks louder than any appropriated achievement.